Baldwin IV, a 16-year-old boy whose body was slowly killing him. Leprosy was eating him alive, and every breath was agony. His advisors begged him to die in bed like a king should. Instead, he strapped himself to a warhorse and rode through the night to face certain death. Because 26,000 Muslim warriors were 3 days from Jerusalem. The city's garrison, 1,000 men. The arithmetic was simple. Jerusalem would fall. The Crusader kingdoms would collapse. Christianity would be erased from the Holy Land. Saladin had already won. He just didn't know it yet. What happened next violated every law of medieval warfare. And the secret wasn't superior weapons or tactics. It was absolute faith in the face of certain death. November 1177. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was dying. Saladin had done what no Muslim leader had managed in 80 years. He'd united Egypt and Syria under one banner. His army of 26,000 warriors was the largest force the region had seen in generations. Mamluk cavalry, Syrian infantry, Egyptian siege engineers, an unstoppable tide marching toward the Christian kingdoms. Standing against him was a 16-year-old boy whose body was rotting from leprosy. King Baldwin IV could barely walk. His hands were bandaged stumps that struggled to hold a cup. His face was so ravaged he wore a silver mask to hide the decay. Physicians said he should have been dead years ago. His advisors whispered he should abdicate, that a leper couldn't be king. Baldwin refused. Someone had to hold the kingdom together, and no one else would. The military situation was catastrophic. The kingdom's best knights were scattered across a dozen fortresses. The treasury was empty. European reinforcements had stopped coming. Every month, Saladin captured another fortress, cut another trade route, tightened the noose. On November 18th, Saladin's 26,000 warriors crossed into Crusader territory. His target, Ascalon, the coastal fortress controlling the southern approaches to Jerusalem. With Ascalon fallen, the holy city would be surrounded. Baldwin called his war council. The mathematics were brutal. The kingdom could muster maybe 5,000 fighting men, but they were scattered across hundreds of miles. Gathering them would take weeks. Saladin would reach Ascalon in days. "We should negotiate," one advisor urged. "Offer tribute. Buy time." It wasn't cowardice. It was reality. You don't fight battles you can't win. Then a messenger burst in with news. Saladin's army had split. The main force, 20,000 strong, marched on Ascalon. But Saladin himself, with 6,000 elite cavalry, had broken off to raid the countryside near Ramla. The nobles saw disaster. Baldwin saw opportunity. "How many men can we gather immediately?" he asked. "Not in weeks. Now." His marshal calculated 500 royal knights, 80 Templars from Gaza, maybe 3,000 infantry. Total, 3,500 men against Saladin's 6,000 elite cavalry. Still suicide, but less suicidal than facing 26,000. "We ride at dawn," Baldwin announced. The chamber erupted in protest. The king was dying. He could barely sit a horse. Even if they reached Saladin, they'd be outnumbered 2-1 by the finest cavalry in the Muslim world. Baldwin cut through the objections. "If we don't stop Saladin now, when will we?" Silence. Because everyone knew the answer. Never. At dawn on November 24th, Baldwin IV, strapped to his saddle because his legs couldn't grip the horse, led 3,500 men out of Jerusalem on a forced march that would kill half their horses and leave the survivors too exhausted to fight. But first, they had to find Saladin, and the clock was ticking. By midday on November 25th, after riding through the night, scouts returned with impossible news. They'd found Saladin's army, 6,000 cavalry camped near Montgisard, just 15 miles from Jerusalem. But there was more. Saladin's forces were scattered across miles of countryside, looting villages, gathering supplies. They weren't in battle formation. They weren't even alert. Because Saladin didn't know the Crusaders were coming. His scouts had reported Baldwin still in Jerusalem, too sick to ride. The Sultan had no idea 3,500 Christian warriors were hours away. Baldwin's marshal saw the opportunity immediately. If they struck now, before Saladin consolidated his forces, they might have a chance. But the Crusader army had been riding for over 30 hours. Their horses were exhausted. The men were barely staying in their saddles. They needed rest. They didn't have time. Baldwin made his decision. Attack immediately. No rest, no preparation. A straight charge into an enemy that outnumbered them, with exhausted horses and half-dead men. It was suicide, but it was also the only chance they'd ever get. The Leper King began issuing orders with tactical precision that stunned his commanders. The 80 Templars would form the spearhead, a wedge of heavy cavalry designed to punch through enemy lines. Behind them, 420 secular knights would exploit the breach. The 3,000 infantry would stay hidden in dead ground until the charge hit, then appear on the flank to spread panic. It was brilliant and insane. Odo of Saint Amand, the Templar Grand Master, understood what Baldwin was asking. Templars took vows never to retreat, never to surrender. But this wasn't a battle. This was a suicide mission disguised as a charge. "Your Majesty," Odo said quietly, "if we do this, most of us won't come back." Baldwin's response was simple. "Then we make it count." The Bishop of Bethlehem stepped forward, carrying the true cross, the holiest relic in Christendom. Its presence told every knight. God himself marched with them. At 1 p.m., the Crusader army crested a ridge overlooking Montgisard. Below them, Saladin's 6,000 cavalry were spread across the valley, unprepared, unaware, vulnerable. Baldwin raised his bandaged hand. His voice, weakened by disease but steady with conviction, gave the order that would change history. "Charge!" Saladin's greatest mistake was arrogance. He'd spent weeks watching the Crusader kingdoms fracture. He knew their armies were scattered, their treasury empty, their king dying. When his scouts reported Baldwin still in Jerusalem, too sick to leave his bed, Saladin believed it. Why wouldn't he? No dying leper would ride 30 hours to fight a battle he couldn't win. So Saladin made the decision that would cost him everything. He let his army spread out across the countryside. Foraging parties ranged for miles. Supply wagons scattered. Cavalry units broke formation to loot villages. His 6,000 elite warriors, the finest cavalry in the Muslim world, were dispersed across the valley like seeds scattered in the wind. His second mistake was timing. November 25th, 1177, 1:30 p.m. Saladin was in his command tent reviewing maps when the first screams reached him. At first, he didn't understand. Screams could mean anything. A fight over loot, a horse gone wild, a cooking fire, spreading. Then, a scout burst into his tent, face white with terror. Christians, thousands of them, charging from the ridge. Saladin stepped outside and saw the impossible. A wedge of white surcoated Templars thundering down the slope at full gallop. Behind them, hundreds of knights in full armor, the ground shaking under thousands of hooves, the sound like an avalanche of iron and fury. And leading them, impossible, unthinkable, a silver-masked figure strapped to a war horse. Baldwin IV. The dying boy who should have been in Jerusalem. Saladin's mind raced through calculations. His army outnumbered the Crusaders. His Mamluks were the finest warriors in Islam. He could win this. But first, he had to gather his scattered forces, form battle lines, organize a defense. He had minutes, maybe seconds. The Templars were already halfway across the valley, moving at speeds that shouldn't be possible for armored cavalry. Saladin screamed orders. Horns blared, drums pounded. Warriors scrambled for weapons and horses. Too late. The Templar wedge hit Saladin's half-formed center like the fist of God. The Templar wedge didn't just break Saladin's line, it obliterated it. 80 knights in full armor, riding exhausted horses that somehow found one final burst of speed, hit the Muslim center with force that defied physics. The sound, Metal on metal, bone on bone, screams of men and horses echoed across the valley. The front rank of Mamluks simply ceased to exist. Lances punched through shields, through armor, through bodies. War horses weighing half a ton trampled men into the dirt. The Templars didn't slow, didn't stop. They drove through the Muslim line like a spear through cloth. Behind them, 420 secular knights exploited the breach. They poured into the gap the Templars had torn open, widening it, turning it into a chasm. Muslim cavalry tried to close ranks, but there were no ranks anymore, just chaos. Then the 3,000 infantry appeared on the flank. Saladin's warriors, already reeling from the cavalry charge, suddenly saw thousands of Christian soldiers emerging from dead ground. The psychological impact was devastating. They weren't fighting 500 knights. They were surrounded. Panic spread like wildfire. Muslim cavalry, elite warriors who'd never known defeat, broke, not in organized retreat, in pure animal terror. They abandoned their positions, their commanders, their sultan. They ran. Saladin screamed orders that no one heard. His bodyguard formed a desperate circle around him, but the battle had already dissolved into massacre. Baldwin, strapped to his saddle and barely conscious from pain, saw the Muslim line collapse. His gamble had worked. The impossible charge had shattered an army twice their size. But he didn't stop. Forward! His voice, weakened by disease, somehow carried across the battlefield. Don't let them regroup! The Templars, their white surcoats now brown with blood, obeyed. They pursued, the fleeing Muslims with methodical brutality. No mercy, no quarter. This wasn't just a battle, it was extermination. Odo of St. Aman's sword arm moved like a machine. Strike, kill, move, strike, kill, move. Around him, Templars fought with the mechanical efficiency of men who trained their entire lives for this moment. The pursuit lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of slaughter that turned the valley into an abattoir. Muslim warriors fled toward ravines, only to find them blocked by Crusader infantry. They tried to form defensive positions, but exhaustion and terror made organization impossible. Saladin himself barely escaped. His bodyguard died to the last man buying him seconds. He fled on a racing camel, a pack animal, not a warhorse. The ultimate humiliation for a sultan who prided himself on martial prowess. By 4 p.m., it was over. 6,000 of Islam's finest warriors had been destroyed by 500 knights and 3,000 infantry. The valley was carpeted with bodies. The ravines were filled with the dead, piled so high that survivors later claimed you could walk across them without touching ground. Baldwin, finally allowing himself to collapse, slid from his saddle into the arms of his knights. His bandages were soaked with blood from reopened lesions. His body had been pushed beyond any human limit. But he'd won. Against every law of warfare, every calculation of odds, every rational prediction, the impossible had happened. The setting sun painted Montgisard in shades of red that had nothing to do with the sunset. Bodies carpeted the ground for 3 miles. In the ravines, they were piled 20 feet high. The chronicles claim 20,000 Muslim dead, an exaggeration, but even conservative estimates show a massacre unlike anything the Crusades had seen. Baldwin, finally lifted from his horse, collapsed immediately, but he insisted on one final act. There, surrounded by thousands of corpses, the Leper King led his exhausted army in prayer. Non, nobis domine, they chanted. Not to us, Lord, but to your name give glory. 500 blood-soaked Templars knelt while surrounded by the greatest slaughter they'd ever witnessed. Some wept. Others stared at the carnage, unable to process what they'd done. Odo of St. Amand knelt beside Baldwin. Your Majesty, you've saved the kingdom. Baldwin's whispered response. God saved the kingdom. We were just his instruments. The Leper King lost consciousness. The material gains defied calculation. Saladin's entire war chest, literal tons of gold, meant to fund months of campaigning. Enough weapons to equip 10 armies, thousands of horses, supply wagons filled with everything the bankrupt Kingdom of Jerusalem desperately needed. But the real treasure was psychological. Saladin's humiliation was absolute. He arrived in Cairo with fewer than 2,000 survivors from his 6,000. His flight on a racing camel, a pack animal, became a joke whispered across the Muslim world. His emirs questioned their sultan's judgment. Some wondered if God had withdrawn his favor. The man who'd never known defeat had lost an army to 500 knights. Ibn al-Athir, the Muslim chronicler, called it the most terrible catastrophe to befall Islam in this age. Jerusalem erupted in celebration. Church bells rang for 3 days. People who'd been preparing to flee danced in the streets. But in the royal chamber, Baldwin lay dying. The battle had pushed his ravaged body beyond all limits. Every lesion had reopened. His legs wouldn't move. Physicians warned he might not survive. Yet somehow, the Leper King endured. When asked how he'd found the strength, Baldwin whispered, "Pain means nothing when God requires service." Saladin would need 10 years to rebuild what Baldwin destroyed in 3 hours. The kingdom was saved. For now. The question haunts every telling of this story. How? How did 500 defeat 6,000 warriors backed by 20,000 more? How did exhausted horses outrun fresh cavalry? How did a dying teenager outgeneral the greatest Muslim commander of the age? The Christian chroniclers said divine intervention. The Muslim chroniclers agreed. Modern historians offer tactical surprise, psychological warfare, superior morale. All true, all insufficient. Because the real answer isn't found in tactics or miracles. It's found in understanding what happens when someone with nothing to lose faces someone who thinks they've already won. Baldwin IV knew he was dying, had known since he was 9. His body was a rotting shell. Every rational calculation said he should have died in bed. Instead, he strapped himself to a warhorse and rode into legend. Saladin had everything to lose. His reputation, his alliance, his invincibility. He assumed victory and paid for it with thousands of lives. That's what made Baldwin unstoppable. Not superior tactics, not divine favor. Simply the absolute absence of fear that comes from accepting the inevitable. When Saladin died in 1193, his last words were reportedly about Montgisard, about the battle that shouldn't have been possible, about the enemy he'd feared more than any army. The battle became legend within months. Muslim poets wrote elegies trying to explain the inexplicable. Christian monks illuminated manuscripts showing Baldwin's silver mask gleaming on the battlefield. Knights across Europe sailed east, inspired by a boy king who'd done the impossible. History remembers the great conquerors, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon. But history also remembers Baldwin IV. Not because he conquered anything, but because for one impossible afternoon, he proved that courage can overcome mathematics. 850 years later, we're still telling his story, still marveling at what he accomplished, still drawing inspiration from a boy who refused to let a rotting body stop him from being a king. The silver mask is long gone. The battlefield has been built over. But the story remains. The legend endures. Sometimes courage matters more than calculation. Sometimes, one person can change everything. Baldwin IV proved it on November 25, 1177.